From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and here's what's ahead. K-State's Jaymelynn Farney is back with more on utilizing cover crops as grazing forage for cattle this fall into winter, this time on turning the cow herd out on a fall-planted small grains or brassica crop. She cautions you producers to keep cow intake of those forages in check. She'll explain why. Also, K-State's Vipan Kumar will report on his field tests of a new wheat production system that's designed to help you producers combat feral rye problems in your wheat stands. And K-State's Charlie Lee talks this week about a new study of supplemental feeding of deer and if that helps hunters in finding high-quality bucks. All that and more straight ahead on this Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network, and we're glad to have you tuned in for another Agriculture Today. And first off right here, we want to pick up on a conversation that we started yesterday with our guest about fall-planted cover crops as a grazing resource for beef cattle. The focus yesterday was on utilizing those cover crop forages for beef calf growth, putting stalkers out there, if you will, on those cover crops. Well, today we shift over to one how could utilize same for cow herd grazing. And once more, we're tapping into the considerable knowledge on this topic of Jaymelynn Farney. Jaymelynn, as you know, is a beef systems specialist for K-State Research and Extension. She is based in southeast Kansas. In recent years, she has logged a lot of research time on cover crop grazing programs. So, Jaymelynn, what about turning the cow herd out on one of these small grain forages like wheat, like canola, rye, oats, whatever one might have out there, or the brassicas, the turnips, the radishes that many a producer has been drawn to in recent years as a cover crop option? What are some things for those producers to think about?
Well, for your cows, these cover crops offer a very, very high protein, very high energy feed, and often offer 120 to 140% cow requirements, especially if she's a dry, pregnant cow. And that can be an inefficiency in your system. You can get your cows too fat. And yes, Eric, and those in radio world, you did hear me say cows can be too fat. That can lead to some, negative issues with trying to calve and other breeding concerns. And it's just an inefficiency in your system. You can run more cows and keep them leaner than you can to have a bunch of fat cows. I digress just a little. But in regards to the quality, some of these, especially the brassicas, actually have the same energy value as corn. So if you think about that and you're turning your cows out free choice on these annual forages, especially our winter ones, they're almost eating close to a fat steer ration. So if you're looking to maintain condition, so if your cows are body condition score 5 or 6 and they're a dry pregnant cow, there's a couple of management strategies that you can implement to be able to provide the cows what they need and maximize your land usage. One of them is limit grazing of these fall forages. By limit grazing, you can do that one of two different ways. Researchers at Oklahoma State, how they limit graze on wheat pasture is they turn their cows out onto that wheat 3 times a week for 4 hours each of those times. The rest of the week, the cows are on just dormant native range or prairie hay or stalks, just some high fiber, lower quality feed. And they actually had fall cows at Oklahoma State on this study, and those cows still put on some condition doing that. But they used the annual forage kind of as our protein supplement, per se. Another method to limit grazing is you can calculate or get with one of your extension agents or specialists and calculate how many acres per day or week your cows need to meet requirements, which might not be what they're going to voluntarily consume, and you fence off portions of your field and just kind of strip graze it across and make the cows only consume as much as they need to, limit their total intake. In Nebraska, they get to do that quite often. They have developed a system where they can put hot fence on their center pivots and be able to set up their pivot to move X amount of distance every day to allow their cows to only graze the recommended amount. Now, both of those methods are a little more labor-intensive. So the third method is what I'm kind of calling a combination paddock. If you happen to have, say, corn stalks or milo stalks planted right next to where your annuals are, you can fence off both of them at the same time and allow the cows to have free choice to go back and forth between the annual forage and the corn stalks. When you do that, I've done the math on Big Chief tablet. If you have a 1,300-pound mature cow who's pregnant and is estimated to calve about March 1st, you can run her on 90 days on about 1.2 acres of your annual forage and roughly 2 acres of corn stalks if your corn was 142 bushel, which that's our average corn production in the state of Kansas. So you can fence off that much for your cows, and they do go back and forth and kind of balance their diet. I wanted to see that, so I actually put GPS collars on my cows and tracked them over a period of time, and they do graze those about equally, and cows come off at about the perfect condition.
So you can manage in a very simplistic way, but like you say, it's going to take some extra labor, but the labor pays off in terms of keeping those cows from becoming over-conditioned. That's your main objective here.
Over-conditioned, and if you're doing your limit grazing, you can put more animals on your acreage, which anytime you can get more pounds of product, you will generate more revenue. So acute management, but management that's very attainable if producers would look at some creative thinking here. Jaymelynn, again, sticking with cow-calf grazing on these cover crops. What considerations, if any, should a producer contemplate in as far as their mineral supplementation program for the herd while grazing these forages? For your minerals, it's going to be just a little bit different than, say, your perennial grasses that you're used to feeding. With these annual forages, they're often very high in sulfur, which can interfere with some other important reproductive minerals. But also, if you have a lot of glucosinolates, which is the chemical compound in your brassicas, your radish, turnip, rapeseed, kale, those glucosinolates can tie up iodine, zinc, copper, and manganese, all of which are important for eye, hoof care, immune function, as well as reproduction. So you need to either reduce the amount of brassicas that are growing. We recommend that the diet not consist of more than 80% brassica for your cows to minimize the issues with reproduction potential. But also make sure you have a mineral out there that might be just a little bit higher in your zinc, copper, manganese, or more bioavailable, as well as the most bioavailable form of iodine, which is EDDI. But you also need to make sure your cows are going to eat the mineral. So if they're not wanting to eat it free choice, try and force feed it to them via some additional supplement. The other thing about the minerals is if you have lactating cows on these fall forages, so I'm talking to the fall calvers, you can see some grass tetany. Mm-hmm. So make sure that you have a high mag mineral that those cows are going to consume. I've received phone calls about that it has happened. We kind of forget about it. If you have fall cows on some of these small grains in the winter, you could see some grass tetany issues.
There are so many aspects of cover crop utilization for cattle grazing that we can't cover them all in our time today. But Jaymelynn, you and others at other land-grant universities as well have accumulated a great deal of information in the recent years on the performance of these crops for cattle grazing, and folks can tap into that and then tailor that information to their situations, can't they?
Yes, and that's the beauty, but also maybe the part that's so difficult is there's so many different annual forages that you get bogged down by trying to pick which one's going to be the best. Mm-hmm. Well, there's going to be the best for every different operation. We can't just say this is the best for everybody in Kansas.
Right. Again, producers take full advantage of the volumes of information that Jaymelynn has been accumulating in her research over the last several years on the various cover crop types, their grazing potential, managing them to their fullest for that purpose, and what adjustments would be appropriate for you to make in maximizing the herd nutrition value of these winter annuals. Jaymelynn, we always appreciate the opportunity to talk about this topic with you, and we'll catch up with you again soon. Many thanks.
Thank you, Eric.
That from Beef Systems Specialist, Jaymelynn Farney, K-State Research and Extension. Do search for more information from Jaymelynn's research program on the K-State Research and Extension website, ksre.ksu.edu, and enter the words cover crop grazing. Agriculture Today returns after you hear this. You're tuned to the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're tuned into Agriculture Today, and welcome back. Well, one of the more formidable challenges for winter wheat production in several parts of Kansas, the grassy weed known as feral rye. And you wheat producers who've encountered feral rye know exactly what a headache that can be in controlling it and keeping it from challenging your wheat crop. Well, there is a new herbicide and seed technology system out there that may allow some opportunity for improved feral rye control, and it has been tested in K-State field trials by our guest now. Vipan Kumar is a weed scientist at K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes. Before we talk about the system itself, Vipan, feral rye is a real troublesome problem for wheat growers in this region, isn't it?
Yes. Thanks, Eric, for having me.
Sure.
For sure, feral rye is one of the winter annual grassy weed species we see in our wheat production system. Not only in Kansas, but other central Great Plains states like eastern Colorado and Oklahoma and even Pacific Northwest. Why it is more problematic, in addition to what other weeds do in terms of competition and take care of the nutrients and the moisture, if you have feral rye seeds at the time of wheat harvest, it can reduce the quality of wheat grains as well. So it can cause wheat dockage. It can reduce the prices of your wheat at the elevator. That's another big issue with the feral rye seed in wheat. And Unfortunately, in the past, we didn't have any effective herbicides we can use in our conventional wheat varieties to take care of this weed species.
Because wheat and rye are so closely related, selective control was really hard to achieve.
Yes. Controlling a grass in a grass crop is a challenging. And in 2002, we had a new seed technology came into the market. Everybody probably know Clearfield system. Mm-hmm. That on that seed or on that variety, we can use Group 2 herbicide, commonly known as Beyond. But over the years, researchers have seen, and even growers have observed, pretty inconsistent control with Beyond of this farrow rye especially. And growers were looking for some sort of option for controlling this weed species in wheat. And recently, this CoAXium wheat has come into the market, and that looks pretty promising.
Well, let's talk further about the new seed technology and the new control system that goes with it. The name, once more, CoAXium. Mm-hmm. What are the characteristics of the technology?
Yeah, so let me give you a little bit overview of what is the CoAXium wheat production system that can tolerate Group 1 herbicides. This wheat variety has been developed by Colorado State University in collaboration with Albog. And on this variety, we can use Group 1 herbicide, which is basically a FOPS, which is a subfamily of Group 1 herbicide or ACCase inhibitors. The herbicide, which is a label in this system, is aggressor. And aggressor, the active is Xylofop. Xylofop comes in a different formulations and different products, like Assure is one, which is probably growers know. It's old chemistry, but very effective on grass species. As per the label, you can go aggressor using 8 to 12 ounce rate for majority of the grass species. But for farrow rye, they have labeled 10 to 12 ounce rate as the minimum rate if you're going to use this variety and going to target farrow rye.
And there are 3 winter wheat varieties which will tolerate this new aggressor herbicide option.
Yes, there are 3 commercially available varieties right now, but Bima Grain, which is the seed provider company, they have been working with the other state breeders to bring that trait into their local varieties. But right now, there are only 3 varieties which are basically having genetic background from CSU breeding program.
All right. What we want to do briefly here, Vipan, is to go over your field trials as well as your greenhouse studies of this system. Mm-hmm. You, first of all, in field, tried it out in the central part of the state last growing season, correct?
Right. We did a trial with a grower in Great Bend area where they had some natural infestation of farrow rye. And we laid out some plots there and put a couple of treatments looking at different rates and different timings of aggressor. Aggressor rate we used basically 10 ounce in fall with NIS or MSO adjuvant system, and 10 and 12 ounce in spring application timing with MSO. And then we had a split rate of 8 fluid ounce aggressor in the fall and then 8 again in the spring. So there were like split application 8 by 8. We have seen pretty good control with both application timing and both rates actually towards the end of the season. All those treatments were pretty consistent and similar in terms of farrow rye control. We got more than 95% control of farrow rye in all those treatments.
That's excellent, really.
Yeah, it is very excellent, and we have not seen that much level of control with any other herbicide, even like a Beyond or Imazamox. So this is really pretty exciting to see that person level of control.
Were you able to replicate that in the greenhouse study then?
Yes, we did actually a little survey last summer. We collected these farrow rye populations through central Kansas areas like Great Bend, Atkinson, I did a survey, collected about 9 or 10 populations from wheat field, and grow them under greenhouse. And my idea was to compare imazamox, which is a Beyond, along with this aggressor new herbicide, which is labeled in CoAXium wheat varieties, to see the level of sensitivity of our population to each of these herbicides. What we have seen compared to imazamox, aggressor, even very low rate, 8 ounce, it completely killed it. 95-98% majority of those populations were very sensitive to this group of herbicide. So pretty interesting and excited about the technology. But one thing, if growers are using this technology, they have to be careful that these are not cross-resistant or cross-tolerant to other herbicide from same group or group 1 herbicides. So this is only tolerant to FOPs, which is Kizalofop in this case. So products like Axial or Select Max, they cannot use those type of products, although they are group 1 herbicides. Right. So they have to be careful. Kizalofop is the only label herbicide which is aggressor right now.
And just as a sidebar, not only does this system appear to work well against feral rye, it can provide acceptable levels of control against other winter annual grasses.
Yes, it is very effective and pretty active on other grass species, including Downy Brome. We did some trial on Downy Brome last year and previous years in his experiment station, and very excellent control. Same kind of set of treatments we tested on Downy Brome, and actually we are testing now jointed goat grass, and they are also pretty sensitive. We have a couple of populations from central Kansas. So all those grass species we deal with in our wheat production system, majority of those are pretty sensitive to this herbicide. So it will be a good system if somebody is struggling with any of those Downy Brome, jointed goat grass, or farrow rye on their production field. So it'll be a good options to go with.
And just to stress here, on the other hand, it does not provide broadleaf weed control.
It does not. Aggressor is, as I said, is a grass herbicide. It belongs to group 1. It will not control any of broadleaf weeds, so you have to go with some other broadleaf herbicide to take care of your broadleaf weeds. One more thing to note is it is not compatible with 2,4-diamine. So don't mix the 2,4-diamine with the aggressor. Better you can spray some other broadleaf weeds herbicides to take care of the broadleaf weeds.
Well, you have uncovered so far good information that will help producers assess this system for dealing with feral rye. By name, it is known as the CoAXium Wheat Production System. It has been tested extensively and will continue to receive research attention in K-State field trials conducted by Vipan and his team. And we appreciate the word on this, Vipan. Many thanks to you.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you so much.
He is a weed scientist at K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes, Vipan Kumar. You can read more about this in the E-Update series out of the Department of Agronomy at K-State, an article on Vipan's work posted on October the 11th at agronomy.ksu.edu. Have a look. And you're tuned in to Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and moving ahead now with today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, last week's accommodating weather allowed for good row crop harvest progress around Kansas, according to the weekly report from the USDA. For the week ending on Sunday, our topsoil moisture in the state at 5% surplus, 68% adequate, 27% short to very short. Subsoil moisture at 5% surplus, 71% adequate, and 23% short to very short. Winter wheat planting 77% complete now. That's very near the 5-year average, and wheat emergence at 49%, right on the average for the date. The corn harvest is 62% complete. That's behind the average of 73%. And soybean harvest 32%. That's behind the 41% average. As for grain sorghum, the crop mature now at 87%. That's right on average, and the sorghum harvest is at 27%. That's behind the 35% average for the date here in Kansas. For a look now at the corn and soybean harvest progress nationally, here's the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA meteorologist Mark Brusberg has the latest on corn maturity.
The National Ag Statistics Service has reported that as of October 20, corn was 86% mature. Normally, they would be about 97% mature. Last year, they were 99%. So we're still seeing the effects of the late planting and some of the cool weather that slowed down the crop.
Harvest numbers are further behind.
30% of the corn nationally was harvested. That's an increase of 8 points over last week. Last year, they harvested 48%, and the average was 47%. So they're still nearly 20 points behind schedule in harvesting.
Brusberg says the nation's soybean crop is faring better than corn.
They're dropping leaves on 94% of the acreage. That's pretty close to the 5-year average of 97%, and last year they had 98%.
Still, though, he says soy farmers are lagging in harvest.
They were able to harvest 46% total as of October 20, and that's behind last year's 51, and the 5-year average is 64, but they did jump 20 points from the previous week, so they were able to get into the field.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And winter wheat planting progress nationally remaining in line with the average pace. As of Sunday, 77% of winter wheat was planted. That's slightly ahead of the 5-year average. And the grain sorghum harvest nationally, 49% as of this past weekend, behind the average of 53%. And officials from both the U.S. and China are indicating there has been progress on the Phase 1 agreement between the two sides. Chinese Vice Premier Liu He offered positive signals over the weekend that the talks with the U.S. are making, quote, concrete progress, and both sides are working toward a partial trade deal. He added, though, negotiations must be on an equal basis. He reiterated that China is willing to work in concert with the U.S., quoting here, to address each other's core concerns on the basis of equality and mutual respect. Meantime, President Trump said on Friday he thinks a trade deal between the two countries will be signed by the time the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meetings take place in Chile in mid-November. Next up on Agriculture Today, that weekly feature for you dairy producers, Milk Lines, with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I want to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning the quality of our forages that we've harvested in 2019. As I see reports rolling in from our 2019 forage quality harvest, it has a bit of a concern. Number one, let's talk about alfalfa hay. It's really difficult to get alfalfa hay put up correctly this year, as well as alfalfa silage. So many of those samples that I see coming in are, well, let's say less than adequate to support high levels of milk production. So if you're feeding your own alfalfa hay, or if you're purchasing alfalfa hay, please get it tested, because there is a lot of variability in the quality. And of course, you don't want to pay, if you're purchasing, you don't want to pay for something that you're not getting. So hay testing is very, very critical this year. Make sure you visit with your nutritionist as to how to sample and how often you should sample, depending on if you're buying hay in or if you have your own hay on the farm. Second type of forage that I want to address is our small grain silages. Many of those were put up post-boot stage. In other words, the head was emerged before we had an opportunity to harvest those. It was great for yield, and we got very high tonnages off of those fields in many cases. However, as you start looking at your forage analysis, you're going to probably be disappointed. As you start feeding those silages to your dairy cows, you're going to probably be disappointed in the amount of milk production that you might get as a result. What's the issue? Well, it's really all about the amount of ADF and NDF fiber that are found in those, and then the undigestibility of that fiber. When we harvest after boot stage into the head stage, we see a significant increase in the amount of undigestible fiber in these types of forages. This is going to reduce overall dry matter intake in the herd and also make available to the animal lesser amounts of energy. Thus, this is the reason why we generally see a decrease in milk production. It has partially to do with the amount of energy the animal is able to obtain from that forage, but also the impact on dry matter intake. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about what you might be working with your nutritionist as you move forward. You've got these forages put up. They're probably not of the quality you would really like, so how are you going to feed through this? This is a very important decision and discussion that you need to have with your nutritionist, and here is why. There are some things we can do to make this feed better, i.e. get more milk out of the cows while we're feeding forages that are less than desirable in forage quality. However, we'll never get to the levels that we could have gotten with higher quality forage, so keep that in the back of your mind as you have these discussions. Keep in mind that right now, energy, such as corn or milo, is a very good buy, as well as soybean meal or canola meal. So we do have ways to adjust the ration. Again, you just need to take some time with your nutritionist. This year, you might be chasing your nutrition program on your dairy a little more than what you've been used to, just due to all the variability that we see in forage quality. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to check out the forage quality on their dairies today.
And many thanks to you, Mike. K-State's Charlie Lee awaits to talk wildlife management with us next on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today continues now, and in the guest chair once more to talk wildlife management with us, Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Continuing, Charlie, on this topic of supplemental feeding of wildlife, and this time concentrating on feeding deer. This is an approach that a number of hunters take to identify deer as the season comes up.
Well, feeding wildlife is certainly a widespread practice. It's probably been going on for centuries. Providing supplemental food is common for deer or other big game in Europe and North America. And then those folks that are trying to manage for deer intensively supplement feeding for deer for kind of a variety of reasons. Some folks do it to try to increase winter survival. Others think that they can increase the density of the deer that are found on that property. Some folks try to use it as a means of pulling deer away from agricultural crops or places that they want to protect and reduce the damage to agriculture or forestry products by putting food plots or feeders in. Others think that they can increase the carrying capacity of an area or increase the survival of young deer. And then a majority of them think that feeding is probably going to improve the trophy quality and body mass of the animals that they're found. But I think many people don't think about all of the other impacts that wildlife feeding can have, and not just amongst the deer, but also in various trophic levels, because it also affects predation rates It can change the competition between adult or more mature deer and younger or juvenile deer. You can also have competition between different species. You can alter the non-target species behavior. There's lots of reasons not to feed, but I believe overall that most biologists have come to the conclusion that it's allowed, it's legal, and really doesn't have a significant impact on harvest. So with those kind of thoughts in mind, some states have outlawed feeding, but what I see happening more and more is more states are starting to allow feeding, with deer managers trying to determine are there going to be any significant impacts if we start allowing hunting over feed.
So there is a new study out which actually measures the impact of this supplemental feeding on the deer hunt and success there. What kinds of feed are we talking about generally, though?
I think most times we're talking about supplemental feeding and baiting, and they somewhat blend together. With supplemental feeding is when you're providing the concentrated food to increase survival or carrying capacity. But baiting is usually providing that same type of food source for the primary purpose to attract wildlife up to an area for harvest. Most of the time that's done with either a pelleted deer product or whole corn. David Stone, Dr. Stone, worked on his Ph.D. at the University of Georgia, studying deer use of bait sites and what the impacts of those bait sites had on the deer populations. One of his primary questions was there some changes in the social status, sex, and age of deer that utilize deer feeders. So he ran trail cameras on 16 different feeding sites and 2 consecutive hunting seasons on a 4,000-acre tract of land in Georgia. The land appeared to be pretty well managed for deer. They had a deer density of around 40 to 50 per square mile, which is certainly higher than what most would be here in Kansas. Had a good balanced sex ratio of 1 buck to 1.1 does. 61% of the bucks were aged 2.5 or older. 40% were 3.5 or older. So that's more than a third of the bucks. So that tells me that the property had been well managed, but they still had a significant harvest of about 10 deer killed each season, which was around 1 deer per 400 acres. That would include both does and mature bucks. So he pulled the sample of his photos. He had subsampled them just to keep it manageable. He looked at about 7,000 photographs that contained deer. He categorized those to dominant adult bucks that were determined to be aged 2.5 or older. He also categorized those yearling bucks, which would be 1.5 years of age, and then the does that would be 1.5 years of age or older. Some of his conclusions were that adult bucks rule the feeders. When they're on the scene, other deer stay away. But I think what makes it important is when do those bucks show up at feeders. And the adult bucks are not there during pre-rut, or the mature bucks are not there during breeding season. So hunters that are using and hunting over corn feeders during rut are probably not seeing very many mature deer at that point in time, certainly very few mature bucks.
So then, if supplemental feeding and monitoring those sites does not produce an opportunity to harvest a trophy buck or otherwise quality buck, are there other ways of getting a read on their activity other than supplemental feeding to potentially enhance the hunt?
There are some other techniques to survey the deer that are out there. I think many hunters have went to using cameras or hunting stands or hunting locations that would be over scrapes and rubs, and that may be something for the next week's program. But I think there are certainly ways you can get images of the mature deer that are in an area and probably increase your odds of harvesting that mature buck rather than setting over a corn feeder.
So we'll expand on that next week, but the message here from this research is that the supplemental feeding approach may not pay the dividends that the hunter is wanting here.
Well, I think it could be synthesized very quickly in that You're 3 times more likely to see a doe or a yearling buck during the legal hunting hours than an adult buck from pre-rut through the end of October. So that tells me post-rut, you might find these mature bucks, but during the peak of the breeding season, which is basically through the mid to the last part of November here in Kansas, setting over a corn feeder may not be your best opportunity to harvest a mature buck.
And that was the finding from a study out of Georgia recently, again, looking at supplemental feeding of deer, how that ties into the chance to take a high-quality buck. Charlie, we appreciate the word, and we'll talk about this more next week. Many thanks. Charlie Lee, Wildlife Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. That'll do it for our Tuesday edition. Thanks for listening in. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.